Odd as it sounds, today's PLE Wednesday is going to be about the impending WWE Draft. We're going to talk the rules of the draft, who will not be drafted, and names going to Raw and Smackdown in the next week. We also have names moving from NXT to the main roster, and some names on the main roster moving to NXT, including one who debuted on the main roster quite recently and had a big moment at WrestleMania. With so much jam-packed into one video, I'm not going to waste time. I'm going to dive straight in and start telling you what's going to happen at the draft. First, the rules of the draft that the WWE has determined for this year. And most importantly, SmackDown picks first. This is vitally important to see who's going to be the number one draft pick, because it'd be impossible not to be Cody, right? Well, apparently, it's not going to be any champions. All champions are locked in, meaning that Cody Rhodes is already 100% a SmackDown guy. The only change to that rule is the Women's Tag Team Championships, which can be on either brand and as such are eligible for both, or in fact eligible to be separated completely, given the Damage Control might not even be the champions come the moment itself. On SmackDown there'll be 16 picks over the course of 4 rounds, on Raw there'll be 6 rounds and 24 picks, so we know there's going to be 4 picks per round, and that will be over the course of the show roughly every half hour. Also importantly, the rosters do not lock once the draft is over, meaning that trades can still be made. In fact, the rosters are not finalised until Raw on the May 6th, which is after Backlash. That means championships could change hands and last minute changes may have to be made, including, for example, Liv Morgan winning the World Championship from Becky Lynch, meaning that Becky has to be drafted along with Seth to SmackDown. Keep an eye on that one because I'm confident it will impact the finish of the overall draft. Let's get on to people who will definitely not be drafted when it comes to this year's draft. The Rock, definitely amongst them. There are not even rumours of that. CM Punk will not be drafted in the draft this year either, even though he is expected back around SummerSlam time. Rhea Ripley will not be drafted in the draft this year. Bo Dallas will not be drafted, even though we're starting to see teases for him when it comes to the different QR codes being shown on screen. Carmella will not be drafted, even though she's en route back, and nor will Alexa Bliss. They are not ready to return just yet, and the WWE isn't pushing them to get ahead of schedule. Let's get to the actual draft now, and be aware I'm not going to have 10 rounds of drafting and 40 picks. I'm going to go over 15 names, some of which will go to Raw, some of which will go to SmackDown, and also 3 additional in these 3 rounds that I'm giving that are going to NXT. Please be aware that these are still predictions with just a tiny smidge of information. In the absence of being able to pick Cody Rhodes first, it has to be Roman Reigns. I have Roman Reigns, Solo Sikoa and Tama Tonga moving to Monday Night Raw. Now I know this isn't quite how the layout is for the actual program, but let me go with this one because I wrote these up before the actual rules were announced. I have Roman Reigns, Solo Sikoa and Tama Tonga moving to Raw. That means likely we're going to see a Seth Rollins as first pick, potentially as mentioned a Becky Lynch depending on the championship match, but I do have the entire bloodline moving from SmackDown to Raw. A very new situation, some new blood and a whole colossal victory for Solo Sikoa as he rises to eventually, I believe, get into a fight with Drew McIntyre over the championship. Second is Gunther. Having recently been robbed of his championship, he's set his sights on the King of the Ring in Saudi Arabia. But in the meantime, Cody Rhodes versus Gunther seems to be a natural progression. Cody doesn't necessarily have big matches already lined up on SmackDown. The only real obvious choice is Roman Reigns and potentially a Bobby Lashley, but he'd need serious reheating. Give me Gunther on SmackDown to be chasing for that championship and I will be a happy boy. I also think it's possible Gunther is the number 1 pick because, let's face it, he's got that gravitas about him. Bianca Belair goes to Raw. This does split up Bianca Belair and Jade Cargill, with neither of them left on SmackDown. But when it comes to Bianca Belair, they need a replacement for Rhea Ripley. And in fact, I do see Rhea Ripley versus Bianca Belair way down the line at WrestleMania. They need to be on the same brand, and Rhea Ripley isn't about to get drafted, nor is Judgment Day, with Damian Priest currently the champion. Bianca Belair to Raw really does add a lot more to that era, to that group, and to the actual women's division, which need it if Rhea Ripley does regain the championship from Liv Morgan as currently planned. SmackDown's women's division needs some new blood too. I have Roxanne Perez being the one, the current NXT women's champion, at least until Heatwave when she's going to lose that championship to Julia. For me, Roxanne has the entire world ahead of her. She's got the whole world in her. She's got the whole her hand. And more than just the NXT championship are beckoning. I'm confident we're building towards a Bayley Dakota Kai match, but Bayley versus Roxanne also seems a natural transition point. The final main roster pick of this round goes to Raw. It is Bron Breakker and Baron Corbin. A return, a refreshed, a brand new Baron Corbin, and Bron Breakker, who looks set to be treated like an absolute star. Someone who definitely has feuds with Drew McIntyre, Solo Sikoa, maybe even Roman Reigns in the future, and that's when we don't even consider your Damian Priests and in fact your Dominic Mysterios. It also helps to refresh the tag division, which has already had a very successful refresh, but they can certainly finish the job with the draft. Making room and making way in this round, I have Karrion Kross, the AOP, and Scarlett moving down to NXT. Karrion Kross had success there, and I think he just needs a rebuild of his confidence. The AOP need a refresher as well, and Scarlett needs a bit of room to further develop into the wrestler that the WWE confident that she can be. This is not a demotion, this is a refresh, and I suspect he'll be back this time next year as a brand new, very refined act, similar to how Finn Balor went through his reincarnation. Round 2 begins with a journeyman, Randy Orton, moving to Monday Night Raw. This puts him on a collision course with names like CM Punk, and I just think that will be a lot of fun. This does mean we won't see Randy Orton and Cody Rhodes, a feud that seems made for itself. But with Randy Orton and Cody Rhodes both on the face side, I don't necessarily see that being a feud worth following at the moment. A natural counterpoint to Randy Orton and a swap that's been made more than once already, Seth Rollins goes to SmackDown. Now, once again, this does depend a lot on what happens with the Women's World Championship. The rosters are not locked until after Backlash. I don't necessarily see them splitting Seth and Becky, but I don't see Becky Lynch holding that Women's Championship for very long. I have Liv Morgan staying on Raw, by the way, but that's not one of the draft picks here. She just stays. No yeet, me yeet, because it might be just me Uso, but it's just me squared. Jimmy Uso moves to Monday Night Raw. The Bloodline Civil War plays out on Monday Night Raw. The Usos combine once again, and potentially Roman Reigns, Jimmy and Jey Uso will face Solo Sikoa, Tama Tonga and Jacob Fatu, who apparently, according to Peter Insider, is debuting during the draft, but also, according to Peter Insider, will not be debuting during the draft. Wrestling journalism gets a tough name sometimes, and I've never realised why. Carmelo Hayes goes to SmackDown, someone who can definitely light a fire, someone who would be an early challenger for a champion like a Logan Paul. I do feel Carmelo Hayes and Logan Paul is almost automatically guaranteed, and I'm there for it. Finally, on the main roster for our second of our 3 rounds, Bobby Lashley and the Street Profits move to Raw. This is again a move to strengthen the tag division on Monday Night Raw, really help pad out that 3 hours, but also I feel that Bobby Lashley's done everything he possibly can on SmackDown, particularly with Karrion Kross, AOP and Scarlett moving away to NXT. When it comes to Bobby Lashley, it's a huge opportunity to get amongst the Sheamuses, to get amongst the Drew McIntyres again, to get amongst the big boys who he can fight like a Bron Breakker. To make room, we have again a team going to NXT. This time it is the Viking Raiders. Ivar is still actively wrestling, though Eric has not yet been cleared to return. He will be doing so shortly. A move to NXT, as well as AOP, should really help reinvigorate a tag division that's lost quite a lot of big name teams quite recently. So I do see the Viking Raiders making way to NXT. I don't necessarily think they'll be coming back fighting stronger. I just think they're needed at the moment. We start our 3rd round real hot with Charlotte Flair moving to Raw. She's not yet cleared and will not be in action anytime too soon, but when she does return, she'll be amongst the absolute giants of the industry. People she has admittedly wrestled before, but when you look at the Bianca Belairs, you look at the Rhea Ripleys, you look at the Liv Morgans, there is definitely a group that can seriously benefit from a Charlotte Flair in the mix. Once again, this is quite contingent upon the possibility, which I'm talking myself into here, of Becky Lynch moving to SmackDown as well. It might not be Becky Lynch, but Nia Jax moves to SmackDown. She's done everything she can on Raw. She's finally been defeated, disrupted, waylaid, whatever you want to call it. A move to SmackDown where she can help put Bayley over, can help work with Roxanne Perez, and potentially, if ever we see a face turn for Damage Control, she has opportunities there as well. There's a number of women on the SmackDown roster who could really benefit from a monster to overcome, and in fact someone big to body slam when they're, buff as hell. Naomi versus Nia Jax seems made for it, though that's not necessarily who I'm thinking, and you guys know who that might be, if she's there. LDF and LWO will finally be split. This feud did not ignite. Rey Mysterio has not been able to really make Santos Escobar, so I have LWO moving to Raw. This means that the Rey Mysterio-Carlito feud incoming can play out on Monday Night Raw, but it also means we have people like Rey Mysterio who can work with Sami Zayn, who can work with Bronson Reed. Carlito can certainly work with Sami Zayn, and it creates mid-card title opportunities. I'm excited for it, and I do feel that there's huge opportunities there to get Rey Mysterio back anywhere in the vicinity of Dominic Mysterio, because you know what? That's the gift that keeps on giving. One man who won't be competing for the Intercontinental Championship is Chad Gable. I have him moving away from the belt onto SmackDown, taking the Alpha Academy with him, but for a very brief time. Alpha Academy, including Otis, Akira Tozawa and Maxine Dupree, will split and veer off in different directions during this draft. For Chad Gable's part, he will unite with the Creed brothers and will get essentially a replacement for where Bobby Lashley and the Street Profits were fitting in as a sort of mid-card faction. Chad Gable could well be elevated here, and honestly, Chad Gable versus Carmelo Hayes, Chad Gable versus Logan Paul, it's there in abundance, and I wouldn't mind a Chad Gable versus Cody Rhodes either, nor would Cody Rhodes. Finally, before our big shock NXT move, I have Pretty Deadly moving over to Raw. There are a few too many tag teams on SmackDown and a few too few on Raw, so Pretty Deadly moving over there and providing something a bit different with their backstage segments and a bit more comedy will really help, especially if Alpha Academy is breaking up in the way that it seems to be and disintegrating. My final prediction, and you'll be glad you stayed for this one, Jade Cargill goes to NXT. The WWE believe that Jade Cargill is ready for the big time. It almost feels like Jade Cargill does not believe that Jade Cargill is ready for the big time, and in recent interviews she has been saying that she may want to do some work in NXT. A brief stint in NXT to further hone her abilities and further refine her work in front of the crowd seems apt, and I do feel every now and then, while it wasn't the case of a Dominic Mysterio, it might be the case of a Jade Cargill that she just needs someone to hold her hand a little bit in a brand new, very scary world where she doesn't know anyone in the form of the WWE. Sometimes it's better not to stress people out by driving a little bit slower. Leave your draft predictions in the comments and check out the video on screen now for more on Liv Morgan versus Becky Lynch at Backlash. Until then, thank you and goodbye.